Let's turn to Chris Wallace now, host of Fox News Sunday on your local Fox station this weekend. Sometimes a photo op is just a photo op, as they say, but they seem to get along nicely.
Yeah, and from the accounts we've gotten from both sides, it was businesslike, surprisingly long. As John pointed out, supposed to be a half an hour, ended up being 2 hours and 15 minutes. And there was a lot to talk about. As Tillerson, the Secretary of State, laid it out, they talked about the election meddling, they talked about Syria, and that apparently was the greatest part of the conversation, the most detailed part of the conversation, and there was agreement afterwards to try to work out a ceasefire beginning on Sunday in southwestern Syria that is going to be negotiated amongst the U.S. and Russia and Jordan, which is right on the border there. That seemed to be the brunt of the meeting. They also talked about Ukraine. They talked about North Korea. Syria is the one area where they seem to make some specific progress.
We had been led to believe that the Russians might, put in a request. In other words, lower some sanctions, and that the United States might come back and say, well, you need to get out of Crimea. From the readout we heard there, it doesn't sound like that sort of thing has happened, at least not yet.
No, and in fact, to a certain degree, the question the president bringing up at the very beginning of the meeting, the question of Russian meddling, he pointed out the fact that this was creating real issues in the American Congress. And as we know, the Senate just passed by 98-2 a measure that would increase sanctions. So we don't know exactly, but there seemed to be a little bit of a nuance that one of the ways in which the president was talking about meddling with Putin was saying that this really is a bar in terms of domestic politics and domestic sentiment here in the U.S. to any future progress, and particularly to the idea of lifting any sanctions.
You wonder if the president might at some point come forward and say, look, I pressed this man on his meddling in our election. We're a democracy. We're the most powerful country in the world. We don't stand for stuff like this. And you wonder if some of this, at least media pressure and citizenry pressure, wouldn't diminish to a great deal if he could come forward with something strong like that. I wonder if he will.
Well, it's interesting. One of the questions that was asked of Tillerson in that off-the-record briefing, I listened to the whole briefing staring at a chair, which is what we saw while the briefing was going on, was somebody said, well, in that discussion of meddling, did the president unequivocally say to Putin that he believes that Russia meddled, particularly when Putin denied it? Of course, that's something that he hasn't especially said when he's been talking to the American media. And Tillerson kind of ducked that. He talked about it more in terms of domestic concern. And the other point he made is, look, we're going to agree to disagree on this subject. They're going to say, we're going to say they did it. They're going to say they didn't do it. The real key is to move forward and to make sure it never happens again. And there was some work in that regard. There was talk about a working group that would get together. No future meeting planned yet between Trump and Putin, but a working group of Russian and American officials to try to work together to prevent, I don't know how they do that, you can make promises, but to prevent that kind of cyber interference, not only in the elections of the U.S., but also other countries. Of course, we know it went on in France as well.